In a recent investor Q&A with President Furukawa, one Nintendo investor asked the following question. I am concerned that the improved performance of Nintendo Switch 2, meaning graphical performance, will lead to higher game development costs, which in turn could result in higher software prices and ultimately a decrease in the gaming population. What measures are you considering to address this? Looking beyond the presumption that higher development costs has to mean higher game prices, because no matter how many billions of dollars you're making, you can never make less profit than last time, this person does make a valid point. If the Switch is capable of better graphics, then that will naturally mean higher development costs, and I'm sure many of us have had this thought before, because it's true that as time goes on and as machines become more and more capable of better and better graphics, it just takes more people, it just takes more collective work to create assets and to work with those graphics. It just means more stuff, more effects. If your game is made of pixels, you can potentially have one or two people do like all of the art assets for the game. But more complex and detailed games, they just take a whole lot more work, and Nintendo has done really well in this area because they have been working with underpowered hardware for several generations now, so they've really cut a lot of costs there. And even as technology advances, they're still kind of okay because so many of their games are just so, colorful. They're not making these super hyper photorealistic AAA games, it is just easier to do the kind of artistic work that Nintendo does. Not easy, I just mean you don't have as much of that technical prowess that kind of has to go into every pore on everybody's skin. And it's also true that the Switch 2 is a lot more powerful than the Switch 1, but Nintendo isn't just taking all of that power and putting it into better graphics. They're making sure that the system has more to work with. They're making sure that these games run better, higher resolutions, higher frame rates, more, like DK Bonanza's big rock-breaking effects or Mario Kart's big open world, that kind of stuff. Not just raw graphical power. So in that way, I could see their development costs still not rising that much, at least compared to, other generational leaps between systems and other game companies focusing on more realistic graphics. They're still in a very good strategic place to be, but it still is true. The development costs will still go up somewhat. These games are still getting bigger. It is still just gonna take more work and more money to make the games. That generally means more time to develop a game, but time is money. So from this investor's perspective, this means more cost and less profit. From our perspective, it means just waiting longer for our games. It means us getting grumpy while we wait for the next Zelda game. So it's a concern for everyone. And President Furukawa had this to say in response. Recent game software development has become larger in scale and longer in duration, resulting in higher development costs. The game business has always been a high-risk business, and we recognize that rising development costs are increasing that risk. Our development teams are devising various ways to maintain our traditional approach to creating games amidst the increasing scale and length of development. We believe it is important to make the necessary investments for more efficient development. We also believe it is possible to develop game software with shorter development periods that still offer consumers a sense of novelty. We see this as one potential solution to the concern about rising development costs and software prices, and we will explore it from various angles within the company. So I have seen plenty of people point to this and claim that it's something of a non-answer, not necessarily saying that they are committing to doing anything new, more likely him saying that they're going to keep doing what they have been doing. Because again, Nintendo has had more reasonable development cycles than basically any other company in their position. There are obviously plenty of games that have really lengthy developments, your Zeldas, your Metroid Prime 4s and whatnot. It does happen, obviously, issues do come up, and some games are just so big, they really just do take that long. But for the most part, Nintendo is really good about keeping things reasonable. They try to keep their budgets down, and then they similarly try to keep their sales expectations down, at least for certain series. And that way, they have a very healthy business where, sure, you have your really big sellers that sell millions and millions and millions, but then you have other smaller or more medium successes, and they are happy with that. And that's one reason why they are successful, even though no other company in the entire business can understand how they're doing it, even though it's really obvious, but whatever. Again, that's a whole other conversation. This does, to me, sound like him basically saying that this is something that they are pursuing now. And that's not to say that they've never tried to pursue this ever. You know, it's ongoing. They are always developing their teams. They're always trying to improve efficiency at their company. You know, obviously going into this generation, we knew that they were growing their teams, but it does seem like something that is being addressed specifically at Nintendo, which does make sense. You know, the Switch generation was so successful that going into Switch 2, that's great. Let's grow the company so that we can make even more games. Okay, but yeah, like that does just mean more money. You know, that's just more people on the payroll. So what are you going to do about that? So it makes all the sense in the world that they would be looking at efficiency. He says, our development teams are devising various ways to maintain our traditional approach to creating games amidst the increasing scale and length of development. So basically, we've been doing it pretty well this whole time, and we are continually looking into how to maintain that, how to keep doing what we have been doing. We believe it is important to make the necessary investments for more efficient development. That seems like it's an active push. We need to invest in the ability to make game development more efficient. And then just overall, he just says, we still believe it's possible to make games with shorter development times that are still good. And you know what? I agree with him. Okay, so now there is another thing to consider that has been coming up in the conversation here. What is one way that companies have been trying to increase efficiency and save money? Well, it's the use of generative AI. That is certainly one way that you can potentially be more efficient in your game development. Somewhat recently, Nintendo did put out a statement talking about how they don't really like the idea of using generative AI. And I do see a lot of people getting kind of caught up on the fact that they mainly pointed to it for like legal reasons. You know, it was a little bit harder to say that you created this thing when this thing was not created by you at all. It was literally just pulled from 1,000 different sources. So like it gets a little bit iffy there. We're still in this period where we're trying to figure it out, but I think Nintendo's probably pretty forward thinking, believing it may be a problem later. But is it possible that that's the only reason they're not doing it? And if they overcome that hang-up, they may do it anyway. We really don't know, and I can't blame anyone for being kind of wary there. It is, I hate to say it, but it is possible that sometime in the future, Nintendo could start doing that. I don't like the idea. At the same time, they are very proud. They like to create their own stuff. That's very, very important to them. So yeah, I don't want to go all the way into that territory right now. It is at least a possibility. I think for the most part, if you want to ask me, if Nintendo wants to ask me, you know, if they want to call me in and get my advice on how to better run their multi-billion-dollar business. Obviously, I don't know much about the actual development side of things, like the real day-to-day, like who have you hired and what are they doing? How do you like create a game using your hands? You know, there's going to be a lot of like internal stuff that I could not even fathom. You know, they'll just spout a bunch of words at me and they'll be like, isn't that great? Like we did blah, 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 and it increased efficiency by 5%. I'll be like, yeah, sure. But for me, it really just comes back to, I mean, it's the same argument I've been making, lots of us have been making for just years and years and years now. You know, it's the whole like strategic sequels. Nintendo, I love them. I love that they have so much pride in their work. And, you know, they don't want to do a sequel unless it feels right and all that stuff. They don't want to do any game unless it feels right. They want to do what it feels good to make, and I love that about them. It's just that we have been, like, all sort of waiting for them to just strike a better balance here. As always in a conversation like this, we're going to bring up Majora's Mask. We're going to bring up Super Mario Galaxy 2. And because those games are such great examples of just eternal gems, fan favorites that were made so quickly because they reused assets and ideas from the previous games. The turnarounds were so quick. And in the case of Majora's Mask, obviously too quick. That game, it was crunched like crazy, but like, be a little more reasonable. If it took them a year to make, let's spread it to 2 or like 3 or something. And then of course, Tears of the Kingdom always comes up now, because it's like, you did do the asset reusing sequel thing, and it took even longer than the development of the original, even though it used the same map, yada yada, blah blah blah. I'm just saying, to me, that's where it is. To me, it's like they need to lean on these easier sequels a little bit more often. You know, there is something to be said for starting from scratch, building a game up from the very dirt itself, and spending 5 or 6 years on something to make this really big, grand project. That is cool, but like, they could just be doing so much more. They could be putting out so many more games. And that's the thing, is, you know, we're not asking for them to create like these like garbage sequels, you know? We're not asking for them to just churn them out like crazy. The thing about these sequels is that they're often so good. Super Mario Galaxy 2, many will argue it's better than Galaxy 1 because they refined it. Majora's Mask was an opportunity to tell just a weird story, a super weird story. Like, so if they're producing more sequels, they can lean into weirdness more. They can be a little bit more experimental, because we're not all waiting half a decade plus for this game. Maybe we're just waiting a couple years. So do something different with it, you know? And I was hoping to see this sort of thing more in the Switch generation. I really, really was. And it's a bummer that it didn't really happen. We saw it like a little bit, you know, you had like the Link's Awakening remake, and then they kind of used those bones to make Echoes of Wisdom. That's pretty cool. But for the most part, I just think we could have seen it so much more. I think there are a bunch of Switch games that easily could have gotten pretty easy, quick sequels, and that would have improved upon the originals. Again, I'm not going to list them all right now. But going into the Switch 2 generation, if development costs are rising higher than ever, the economy, all the world stuff going on is worse than ever, the yen is weaker than ever, you have to be more strategic about this stuff. To me, that's the answer. It's like, just stop beating around the bush, get to it, start delivering simpler sequels. Give us DK Bonanza, and then give us DK Bonanza 2 3 years later, you know? And then even beyond that, just smaller games. That's a really big thing too. I love what they did with Bowser's Fury, and that's another example of something that they did, and they really tapped into this huge potential, and they just never really did anything with it. You know, they took not even the most recent Mario game, not even that, the one before that. They took an older Mario game and took its ideas and stuck them together into something that still felt really, really new. And they didn't have to design all of that. It really just, like, the bones were just 3D World put back together again in kind of a new way. That game was a blueprint that we have yet to see Nintendo follow further with. And, you know, and a really big problem here, again, it's another, I'm beating a dead horse here, but like, game prices, it is a thing. Give us smaller projects, but then just don't charge full price for them, you know? Get back into selling us $30 games, $40 games. I'd really love to see more just like middle tier Nintendo games. It's not a tiny little eShop title. It's not a big grand AAA title. It's something in between. And so it's priced in between, and it only took them a couple years to make, and maybe they could have even given it to a smaller studio. Maybe it's something a little bit more experimental. I don't know. It's actually a really humongous conversation, and I have actually been meaning to do a video on it just for years now. I mean, I think even before I had this YouTube channel, one of my biggest and most fierce burning video game opinions was the whole, like, Nintendo sequels thing. Was like, we got Mario Galaxy 2 so quickly, and it's even better than the original. So over a decade now, this has been one of my biggest opinions I just want to talk about the most. And I always end up mentioning it in videos like this, so I really do need to just buckle down and do that video hopefully soon, maybe next month. I don't know. I got a lot of videos on the list, so I will try. I'd really like to. It's more relevant than ever now, especially with Nintendo talking about this, talking about wanting to have shorter development cycles and still deliver good games. So I got a lot of opinions on that. So yeah, maybe I'll do that soon. I don't know. So Nintendo, if you're listening, it's not too late for Odyssey 2, is all I'm saying. It's not too late, you know? The main team working on DK, like great, that's a brand new thing. This is like a side team, Odyssey 2. I'd still buy it. I know it's been 8 years. I'm just saying I'd buy it. Personally, I don't think it's too late. I'm giving you permission.